Because after about the first 20 minutes or so, I was like, oh, this guy has a superpower, and his superpower is that he just references films and television shows, and he knows stuff about them, and he incorporates that into his life. Great. I'm all in. Yeah. And like within those first 20 minutes, I was like, there's going to be a car chase. It's going to be nuts, because he mentions like, to his assistant at the cable station, like, hey, it should have been done this way, or it should have been, the perspective should have been from here.
Yeah.
And then slowly I started to realize that it wasn't necessarily just that. That is a cool element of it, but it's more that his superpower is not a superpower. It's just that he's an extraordinarily observant person with an attention to detail, always. And he utilizes that to his own benefit, to his own detriment. By the time we get to the end of the film, like he wars with himself about what he does to protect his family. But I was enthralled, especially seeing the way that the cameras moved and the way that, what does the filmmaker think is important? And ultimately it just is the story of like, what do you do to protect your family? What do you do to find your family if you think a member of your family is missing, or a member of your family is missing? And what are the moral ambiguity areas that kind of collide in that space? And the fact that story is universal, but expressed so thoroughly and exclusively in this culture here, in this very small village, was like, I kept leaning in closer and closer and closer, being like, where are we going? What are we doing now? And every character has a reason to do what they're doing. It reminded me a lot of what we discussed with the Fablemans. Like everyone had some reason to do what they were doing, and all of their motivations could be understood, even if they were, maybe the only character who is clearly kind of bad would be Sandovan, if I'm saying his name correctly.
Yeah.
Please, stop me if I ever say anything terribly. I don't mean to do that. I just, I'm just excited. But even he has reasons to, like, he knew he saw George at one point, like he knows, and he did. It just was very special to me to be able to kind of break into seeing these films that aren't necessarily like the ones that are popular here in America. The obvious, big one right now being RRR.
Yeah.
And understanding that if you're going to tell a small stakes story on a broad scale to whatever your audience is, and in this case, being how do you pronounce it again?
Malayalam.
Malayalam.
Yes.
if you're gonna present a story to that entire audience, which is your whole world, at this point, until streaming really breaks it out and makes it so that it can be applicable to someone like me in Michigan in a basement. You want to make sure that everyone there can understand it, and it will be large and broad. And it felt large and broad, but also small and personal. And I was just kind of in love with it. I really fell in love with it. It was great.
Yeah.
And the whole time I'm watching it, knowing full well that you recommended it to me and saying that there were remakes and stuff, like I was wondering, what is your relationship with this movie?
No, this movie, like, it's interesting. Like, I think this movie is one of the movies for me that really, looking back on it now, after having watched, some more recent Malayalam movies, this movie kind of defines to me what it is so great about Malayalam cinema and why it's sort of been able to achieve what it has, because it's nothing like super flashy. They tell really good stories. And so far, this is the oldest movie that we've reviewed so far. Like, we reviewed a lot of recent stuff. So, there's a lot of really good techniques that they've done in terms of editing, and some really creative stories they've done with some really larger-than-life characters that are kind of insane. But this story kind of is so grounded and relatable in a lot of ways, right? Like, and a lot of that has to do with the superstar and legend who I'm so glad, got to see. This guy, Mohan Lal, he is, legend is probably not even the right word. He's more of an icon in sort of cinema in general, I would say. Like, his ability to play that role that he did was so good. When you said sort of my history with this movie, I have sort of seen the remake that was made for the Bollywood version. So this was a long time ago, before I even started watching Malayalam cinema. And I'd watch Indian movies on and off, at that time. But I watched that one and I really enjoyed the remake as well. But watching this one here with Mohanlal, I can see why this guy is respected so much. Because I like the one in Hindi, in Bollywood. It's good, but the actor that plays the character George Clooney's role in that one. Ajay Devgan does a fantastic job, but I think of him more as like an action star. So George Clooney, Mohan Lal in this movie, like he was so relatable. Like he's got good comedic aspects to him. He just seems like a regular person, right? And the stuff you mentioned, like obviously the whole movie references something that I think you and I can definitely, and probably people listen to this can probably understand. Like that's where my mind goes to when people are talking about stuff. I'm like, yeah, this is like that scene from that movie, or this is like that.
Honestly, when I started seeing that, within the first 20 minutes, I was like, oh, I wonder why Amit thinks I'd like this movie. Like the referencing and being able to pull those things, being like, it's just like this, And I was so glad to find that it was more than that, because it's unquestionably that to a degree, but it is so much more broad and so much more poignant and specific than just that. It was very, very cool.
No, definitely. So what do you think about sort of the, because like I guess it is kind of a bit different to sort of your traditional Hollywood movies. Like in terms of like the flow of the movie, like they had some songs in between, which were sort of montages. Were these all sort of different to you? And even like the cultural things, like just, the settings or some of the themes that they talked about, like the parents, the concept of dowry was brought up, for instance. Was this all sort of new to you, or what were you thinking while watching that kind of stuff?
It's not that I want to toot my own horn and say that I'm familiar with a lot of stuff culturally in the world, but that it is the case, because I've watched so many movies, because I've read so many books, and because I've really I've studied things, and I understand that the world is much bigger than myself in Michigan and the United States. I've always prided myself on understanding, like, okay, let me peel back the empathy layers as far as I can, when it's presented to me, right? So if someone came into my life and said, this, or hey man, you should check this out, I always did, especially because stories can be so much bigger, and where things are rooted can be so much bigger, and like what we see in Hollywood is often borrowed from something else. So like way back beginning in high school, I would have ideas about things related to dowry, or like being in musicals when I was younger, Fiddler on the Roof. Like these are concepts I was familiar with. But to get more specific about what it was in this movie that kind of crossed with Hollywood versus didn't cross with Hollywood, the songs weren't necessarily out of place, but there was more emphasis on the entire length of a montage of a song, right? Like we talked about Creed, or we talked about Rocky. There, your songs are going to be 30 to 45 second, maybe a minute. And here, a song is going to be like, it's an entire scene. And I really appreciated that, especially in the moment where I really fell in love with this movie was just George enjoying time with his family before everything really started to kind of split off. It was right as his eldest daughter was actually going to the camp, like the extracurricular activity that she does.